Hey everybody, it's Rabbit. Welcome to the channel, and today we're going to be talking about how to research your very own F-14 Tomcat, or F-16, or really whatever the new top tier jet is at the particular moment you happen to be watching. Overall, the US tech tree in air is one of the largest tech trees in the entire game, so it can be a very daunting task to try to get to the end of it. But we're going to see if we can give you some tips and tricks to help you out with that, including advice on how to research in general, and even what premiums I think are currently a good deal. And the very first thing we're going to look at is how do you research in general. Now, every tech tree is divided into ranks and lines. Each of the lines represents a specific type of vehicle, and each of the rank represents roughly a part of the tech tree for the vehicle. Now, in order to progress to the next rank, you have to have a specific number of vehicles of the previous rank. So what you have to do is you have to look at the lines and look at how many vehicles are available for a rank for a given line, to make sure that the combination of lines that you are selecting has enough to get you to all of the ranks. Or to put it in simpler terms, you're going to have to pick which lines you want to research based on how easily those lines can get you through the tech tree. For the American tech tree, it's divided into 5 separate lines. So first we have the Air Force Light Fighter line, then we have the Air Force Heavy Fighter line, then we have the Navy Fighter line, then we have the attacker line, and last we have the bomber line. Now, of these lines, the most populated are the fighter lines. The attacker line still has a fairly good population. The bomber line is actually the lightest. It currently terminates the F-105D at rank 6, so it's probably going to be the least helpful for getting you there, even though they do have some pretty easy aircraft to grind out RP with. Now, it's helpful to note that with the exception of premium vehicles that we'll talk about later, each vehicle can officially research one rank below it and one rank above it effectively. So a rank 4 aircraft could efficiently research rank 3 up to rank 5 effectively. This doesn't mean you can't research vehicles outside of those ranks at all, but you will lose efficiency, and you will lose more efficiency the further away you get. So technically you could research the entire tech tree with a starter vehicle, but that would absolutely take forever. By the time you get to the end, you would be getting almost no research points per match. Now, it is important to note that each vehicle will have one vehicle that researches it more efficiently than the rest. Usually it's the vehicle that comes immediately before it in that line, and this vehicle will give you a small research point bonus. Additionally, if you go through and you research each rank of upgrades on a given plane to fully upgrade it, or spade it as it's called, you will give a research point bonus to whatever you're currently researching each time you complete a full line. So, for example, if you wanted to research the F-14, the best way to get it would be to have the F-4J and fully upgrade the F-4J, as that would give you enough research points to unlock the F-14. However, this emphasis on efficiency can result in some issues, especially if there's an aircraft that you really don't like or you're not good at. So one of the helpful things about War Thunder is because the American tech tree is huge, and because you can research one rank above or below you efficiently, you can just go to another plane if you're getting frustrated with a certain plane. You never really have to play something you don't like just in order to progress. So I would highly recommend, especially if you're struggling with a specific aircraft, just switching to something else. It's not worth it to just have terrible game after terrible game just because you want to be quote-unquote efficient. The first way we're going to look at to speed up your grind potentially is premium time. Now, premium time in War Thunder provides you with a research point bonus and a silver bonus, and even though the research point bonus seems like it's the most relevant part, it's actually the silver. That's the bigger bottleneck you're going to run into if you keep going up the line and playing more and more planes, because obviously you have to purchase the plane with silver as you go. You might have to crew them, you might have to also purchase upgrades with silver. So in my opinion, that is the bigger part of premium time. However, the big problem with premium time is that if you buy 7 days of premium time, that will last for 7 days whether you're on or not. For example, if you had time off of work or school and you were looking at playing 4 or more hours a day, obviously premium time would be fantastic. You'd be getting great value off of it. On the other hand, if you're only playing 1 to 2 nights a week, a few hours a night, it's probably not going to be as good of a deal for you personally. And the last thing we're going to look at before we go into the premium vehicles is we're going to look at some talisman options. Now, talismans are things you can buy for any tech tree vehicle, and what they do is they dramatically increase the amount of research points you get with them. So talismans can be a really useful way to take a vehicle that you're already good at and already familiar with and earn a lot more research points with them. Usually low tier talismans aren't really worth it because there just aren't enough vehicles at low tiers. Sometimes the game will give you free talismans in the battle trophies, but that's pretty rare and you don't have any control over what vehicle you get it for. The two talismans I would recommend would be the F-4C Phantom and the F-8E Crusader. The F-4C seems like an odd pick as it's not a terrifically capable fighter at its battle rating, but it's so fast relative to everything it fights that you can easily do multiple base hits without the enemy ever getting a chance to interrupt you, and you can do that consistently every game. However, this is kind of a boring playstyle and it is very monotonous. The F-8E is a lot more active, it's a lot more fun to play, it's a really good fighter, and I think the F-8E is just in general a lot more fun and would be a better pick if you want something more active, but if you're willing to sit through the monotony, the F-4C certainly works. So the first premium we're going to be reviewing today is going to be the AV-8A Harrier. Now, the AV-8A Harrier is one of a handful of VTOL aircraft in the game. That means it can take off and land vertically. This system is not really required to use to pilot the aircraft. It does take some getting used to, but if you do want to get used to it, it can increase the maneuverability and even allow you to do some fun tricks. In terms of its flight characteristics against other fighters, it is definitely on the slow end for this battle rating. It also doesn't turn terrifically well unless you're using the VTOL system, so in a dogfight it doesn't have a lot of advantages. It does, however, have absolutely ridiculous low-end acceleration. This is probably just added to the game to make sure that the VTOL system can actually function correctly, but it does mean you will absolutely fly off the runway like a rocket. This means you can get up to your relatively modest top speed pretty quickly, which also means you can start translating that forward movement into altitude. And this is what kind of makes the Harrier a pretty viable grinder. The Harrier can pretty easily get up to speed and altitude fairly quickly and have a full bomb load, insofar as it is a full bomb load, to drop on a base, and then it also has altitude to jump on enemies. And of course, because it has the bomb ballistic computer, it can still deliver its bombs accurately even from 4,000 to 5,000 meters in the air. This provides an interesting advantage to the Harrier in that it can be very consistent once you get the hang of this pattern of climbed altitude, drop some bombs on a base, and then pick up some easy targets from people who aren't really paying attention. This can create a very consistent grind, however, the ceiling for its performance is relatively low. As I said, it can't really turn with a lot of the things it's battle rating, and you only have 2 missiles. So your ability to get really good games with the Harrier are kind of limited, but it's very easy to get a fairly good game. In terms of the ground attack role, we're not going to go into this too much because you don't really want to grind the air tree in the ground attack role, but the Harrier is reasonably capable. It does have a good selection of Zuni rockets and bombs that can all be used pretty efficiently, especially with the ballistic computer. Additionally, it does have a few cool tricks in ground battles. For example, you can land on capture points to try and take them, which does take a lot of practice, but it is pretty cool and it works. Additionally, the Harrier can land on the helipad instead of having to use the normal airfield. The helipad's only about 4 kilometers away from the ground battlefield, whereas the airfields are closer to 14. This can allow you to stretch the fairly modest ordnance of the Harrier pretty far. One thing to note about the Harrier when we talk about ordnance, the Harrier does not natively have any kind of countermeasures. You have to take the countermeasure pod on the center line to have access to any kind of chaff or flares, so I'd highly recommend that, and really the only other thing you can take in that slot anyway is a single 500-pound bomb, which isn't going to do much. So I think it really is worth it to just go ahead and take that countermeasure pod just to have the option of having chaffs and flares. And if you do, it gives you something on the order of like 240 countermeasures, so easily enough to last you the entire mission. When I was originally looking at the Harrier, I was going to give it a rating of not being worth it, especially at this point in the meta, because I do feel like it has been kind of passed by. However, going back and replaying it, it was very consistent and honestly was just kind of fun. So I will say, if you see it at half price, the Harrier is probably worth it. It's not the best, but it's not the worst, and it does have a pretty high skill floor that you can use to just consistently bang out matches RP and silver on a regular basis without really having to put a huge amount of effort in. So give it a shot, but I don't think it's necessarily your best choice. For our next premium, we have the absolutely legendary A10 Warthog. Now, the A10 Warthog is kind of in an odd position in the game right now because its flight performance is not the best for its battle rating. In fact, that's putting it mildly. It flies roughly half the speed, if even less in some cases, of basically everything it could ever conceivably fight. This puts the A10 in kind of an awkward position because its main gun, the 30mm, will absolutely annihilate any aircraft you hit with it, and the AIM-9L Sidewinders are quite good. They're what's referred to as an all-aspect missile, which means instead of having to see the exhaust on an enemy plane, you can literally just shoot it when they're coming straight down at you. The drawback to this missile is that if the enemy's coming right at you, their heat signature is quite weak, so it's very easy for it to get fooled by flares, but not every enemy at this battle rating even has flares. So this puts the A10 in a very weird position where you can outturn almost everything you'll see, and you have very capable weapons, but you're gonna get to the fight late. You don't really have a way to press the issue in terms of the battle, and you don't really have a way to try and make sure a good outcome happens. You can often end up with your entire team getting annihilated before you get there, or the entire enemy team getting annihilated before you get there. However, the guns are effective, and this does make the A10 kind of easy to use in that you can't just point your nose at enemies and pull the trigger and get kills. Additionally, if both teams kind of have to return to base and separate, the A10 can just farm ground targets, and you have almost 1200 rounds of ammunition for the 30mm. It can kill any ground target in an air battle match, so you can just fly around picking up 20 to 30 ground target kills and farm a ton of RP. This makes the A10 very feast or famine in air battles, and this is not necessarily what you want in a grinder, but it is very easy to use. In ground battles, it may seem like the primary weapon of the A10 really is the gun. However, you're at a battle rating where you often face missile-based AA systems, so the gun isn't the easiest to use. What you really have is you have Mavericks. This is one of the lowest battle rating vehicles in the American tech tree that has these air-to-ground missiles. These are pretty effective and they have a good range to them when you can get them to lock on, and they are a fire and forget missile, but they are very expensive to spawn. So overall it takes some getting used to, but it is still an effective ground attacker. I have to say that due to the general ease of use and the versatility of the A10, I really have to say that this is probably worth it even at full price. It's not the absolute best and the consistency hurts it a little, but you can easily farm a lot of RP and silver off of one of these if you take it out in an afternoon. So I think it's worth picking up, although if you see a sale, I would recommend it. For our next vehicle, we have yet another strike aircraft. This time we have the A6E Tram. Now, the A6E Tram doesn't have the best flight performance, but it's actually noticeably better, in my opinion, than both the A10 and the Harrier. The big thing about the A6E Tram is its top speed is closer to that of the Harrier. However, if you're at around 800 kilometers an hour, it actually can turn reasonably well. Unlike both of those aircraft, however, this does not have a built-in gun, so you will have to specifically take a gun pod if you want to have the option of a gun available. It can take up to 4 of the AIM-9Ls, whereas the A10 can only take 2, so it does have a little bit more versatility in that area. Overall, I find in air battles, it does have a much stronger ability to take the initiative or try to make good results happen, as it can get up to speed and altitude noticeably faster, and even push opponents that are low on energy. But you don't have the crazy top-end performance where the A10 just farms a bunch of ground targets. The A6E can't really do that, and it can't really take the ordnance to do that. So as an air grinder, I actually do kind of prefer it to the A10, but it doesn't have the crazy high end the A10 does. As a ground attacker, the A6E does have a pretty strong distinction of being one of the lowest BR planes in the game to have laser-guided bombs, in addition to a very nice thermal imaging system. This means that it's actually pretty easy and pretty consistent to get several kills with it in a single outing, especially because you often don't face enemy teams that have a lot of anti-air up. Even though some AA that is pretty solid technically exists at this battle rating, a lot of people at this battle rating are playing premiums, and one thing that they don't currently have in premiums is good AA that has long range. So if somebody's just playing an all premium lineup, they're going to struggle to hit you if you're 4 or 5 kilometers in the air. Overall, while I do feel the A6E in several areas is stronger than the A10, it's also more expensive than the A10, and the question becomes, is it better enough? And I don't think so, at least not at this point. So I would say the the A6E Tram, if you get it on sale, it's probably worth it. I actually get pretty good use out of it, but I don't really think it's worth it at full price for most players. So yeah, I'm gonna say if you see it for half off, go nuts. Otherwise, the A10 is probably better. And for our next premium, we have an absolute standout. We have the F5C. The F5C, when I was originally looking at it as a grinding prospect for the F-14, my thought was it wasn't in a great spot because it was at 10.3 and top tier was at 11.3. So the F5C could see top tier and indeed did in many of its games. However, top tier has moved up to 12.0 and the F5C is still at 10.3, which means the F5C can't even see the best planes in the game even in a max up tier. It can't even see the F-14 Tomcat anymore. This really helped it out a lot. The F5C has fantastic flight performance. If you hover at around Mach 0.9, it doesn't really like to lose speed at all. It can turn very well, it can climb very well. The acceleration isn't great because this is the version with the slightly weaker engines, but overall its flight performance is just amazing. The guns, as long as you select something other than the default belt, are also pretty solid and you get a decent amount of ammo for them. The only real drawback to this plane in terms of its performance in air battles is that it only has 2 missiles and honestly they're not very good. But you don't really need them. The F5C performs perfectly fine without them. Despite the F5C having some air-to-ground ordnance, I don't actually regard it as that great of a ground attacker. You can use things like the bullpups, it has Zuni rockets and some decent bombs, but doesn't have a ballistic computer for them. And honestly, the airframe just does not like having all that weight of extra ordnance on it. And additionally, the US doesn't have a 10.3 lineup, so you kind of have to use it at top tier where you're fighting the best anti-air and air in the game, and I really do not think it fares that well. You can have good games in it, but it's a lot more limited than the other options. Overall, the F5C is in an absolutely fantastic spot now. When I went back and replayed it for this video, I had amazing games in it. The thing really is just an absolute killer, and honestly, it's just a joy to play. I would absolutely recommend it wholeheartedly. I think even at full price, it's worth it, but it's also old enough that it will regularly go on sale too, so definitely pick this one up. I think it's your best chance at grinding the top tier right now. And for our last and newest premium of the day, we have the F4S Phantom II. The F4S Phantom II is pretty easy to describe. It's basically the F4J, but it has AIM-9Hs instead of AIM-9Gs, or at least that's the only difference I've seen. And the difference between the AIM-9G and AIM-9H is not very substantial. In fact, I didn't even really notice when I went back and replayed it. So overall, it basically just is an F4J Phantom. Now, the F4J Phantom is kind of in an awkward place right now in that all it can really be is a supporting aircraft. In a one-on-one, it doesn't fight the best aircraft in the game terrifically well, but it does still have a competent radar. It has good radar-guided missiles in terms of the AIM-7F Sparrows, and you can take up to 6 of them if you really want to. So overall, as a supporting damage, it's fine, but in a one-on-one, there are a lot of aircraft that you don't really stand that much of a chance against. You kind of want to stay with your team and try to pick enemies off. Additionally, you don't have a built-in gun, so if you want to have that option, you have to take a gun pod, which adds to the weight and drag of the airframe. As a ground attacker, the F4S is fine if unremarkable. The real problem with it is it doesn't have any guided ordnance, so you're mostly just relying on a ballistic computer along with Zuni rockets and bombs, which is functional but not amazing. Really, the best thing you can do in most ground battles is just go up with a bunch of Sparrows and clear the skies out of enemy aircraft. Overall, the F4S is fine if unremarkable. The major downside is that you have to fight the best aircraft in the game, and in doing so have to understand how a lot of the more advanced systems such as radars actually work in order to make full use and have actually good games in it. In that respect, I do think it's not really worth its current price. If you were dead set on a rank 7 premium and you asked me which was the better deal, the F4S Phantom II or the A6E Tram, I would generally go with the A6E Tram, mostly because the A6E Tram is just easier to use and doesn't require you to know a lot about the most advanced systems in the game. Overall, though, I don't really think you need a rank 7 in general. There's only a handful of rank 8 aircraft, and you can research all the way through rank 7 perfectly fine, and then grab one of those and research the rank 8 if you really need to. So I don't think the F4S or the A6E Tram are all that necessary right now, but that will change as more aircraft get added. And that concludes our video, everybody. Hope you enjoyed it, hope you had a great time, and I hope this helped you out grinding the American air tree. If it did, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and I hope you have a great day.